I wanted to start by commenting on today's first reading from the first book of Kings. So we have this account of Naboth, the Jezreelite, who had a vineyard. And the king, who was right next door, he wants to take possession of this vineyard. He wants to make it his own garden. But Naboth refuses, and the king offers him money, offers him better land. So seems like a fair deal, a good deal, but Naboth says no, because it's an ancestral inheritance. So in other words, there's sentimental value. It's the family property. It's the family land. So he doesn't want to part with it. Now note what Ahab the king does after this. When he returns home, he lays down on his bed, he turned his face away, and he would not eat. Why? Why is he doing this? So he lays down on his bed, he turns his face away, and he would not eat. Well, he's doing this because he didn't get what he wanted. And there's a very important lesson here for all of us. There are times when we do not get what we want. There are times when we perceive an injustice and we get angry about it. But sometimes we have this same kind of attitude. And basically it's the attitude of a spoiled child. What does a spoiled child do when he or she doesn't get what they want? They mope. They're sullen. They sulk. They sometimes refuse to eat. They just sit there. They're miserable, and they want their parents to know that they are miserable. And when their parents give in and give them what they want, it just reinforces this behavior. Now, the unfortunate thing is that even though we may not have been spoiled children growing up, we all have this inclination to act this way. We get upset, we get angry when things don't turn out our way, or when someone cuts us off in traffic or slows us down. We get angry because we feel we have a right. They opposed our will. They made our lives somehow more miserable. And people do this. And sometimes spouses, they give each other the silent treatment because they're angry with each other. It's kind of like they're trying to do the same thing. It's the same kind of attitude. So it's really a sign of our selfishness, a sign of our pride, a sign of our desire to want things the way that we want. And unless we get them, we're not going to be happy. We're going to be miserable, and we want everyone to know that we are miserable. But his wife comes to his aid and says, well, let me take care of it. I will get the vineyard of Naboth for you. And so she signs letters in Ahab's name, and she arranges this fast, and then she has a couple of individuals accuse Naboth unjustly. And so he ends up being stoned to death. And so now the king can go take possession of the vineyard. And he's happy. In other words, for him, the possession of a vineyard is more important than a human life, than respecting a human life. And his wife, typical individual in a position of power and authority, people use their power and authority unjustly to get what they want. And if we think this only happened in the time of the first book of Kings, we're very mistaken, because it happens to this very day. Political leaders in positions of authority and power use their power. They use their influence to get things the way they want. They will pay the media to report as they want them to report. They might pay the police to do certain things. They get what they want. Sometimes they will cheat in elections to have the elections to turn out the way that they want them to turn out. And many people go unawares of all these things. But it happens to this very day. But you see, we tend to do the same thing. We use our powers, sometimes by being silent, by being sullen, to get what we want. We're doing the exact same thing. That attitude of a spoiled child. So whether we were, spoiled as children or not, doesn't matter. We all have a little bit of the spoiled child syndrome within us. And it's very, very important that we acknowledge this and that we recognize this. So when bad things happen to us, when things don't turn out the way that we want, when we perceive an injustice done to us or to a family member or whatever, what is our attitude? Well, sure, we should be concerned. And yes, we may need to take steps to rectify the situation, but if we resort to acting either like King Ahaz or his wife, then we are in the wrong. Now notice in today's gospel reading, our Lord says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And what a lot of people don't realize, in today's modern age, when people read this, they think, oh, well, if he plucked out an eye, then I have the right to pluck out his eye. That's how we tend to read it. But really, this was actually to limit the vengeance that people would take on each other. Because what would happen is if somebody knocked out your eye, the other person would be so angry they would do even way more damage to you. And basically, it was a principle to limit. So in other words, okay, if somebody stole your cow, well, you have a right to steal their cow, but no more. You can't do any more damage than that. That was kind of the principle there. But of course, our Lord is saying, well, this is not good, because what's going to happen is it's just going to go back and forth, this hatred and this desire for vengeance. And, if you think about it, especially when it comes to teeth, somebody knocks out your teeth, what are you going to do? Punch them? What if you don't knock out two of their teeth? And then he comes back and, well, I'm due one more tooth. I have the right to knock out one more of your teeth. But in the process, he might knock out three. And it just goes back and forth until you have no teeth left, kind of thing, right? So obviously it's not good, and this is why our Lord says, sometimes we just have to accept certain evils in order to put an end to the propagation of evil, because often when evil is done to us and we respond with evil in return, we are just propagating evil. We're just causing it not just to go back and forth, but to spread, because it's going to affect us. It's going to affect our relationships. So our Lord is saying sometimes it's better just to turn the other cheek, just to accept the evil. Okay. Yes, we do have to be prudent in this. When there's injustice and it's ongoing injustice, sometimes we need to speak out. So we have to read it in context of everything that our Lord teaches. So, keeping this in mind, it's connected to today's first reading, because when an evil is done to us, it's a kind of injustice. And yes, we might get down, we might be sullen, because why would somebody do this evil to us? But even in this case, sometimes the best thing is to say, okay, well, I will be the better man. I will just accept this, and I will do my part to be a good person. I will not return evil with evil, but rather I will do the right thing. I will practice true charity. So this is what we are called to do. And of course, we see this in the lives of the saints. Today we celebrate the feast of St. Anthony of Padua. He's an extremely popular saint. As you can see, we have the statue of St. Anthony here, very decorative, and a lot of people have a great devotion to him, in some countries more so than in other countries. And why is it that so many people have such a great devotion to St. Anthony? Well, part of it is because he was such a great saint. He was an extremely great preacher. He was very good at converting the heretics and bringing people back to the faith. Interestingly enough, what a lot of people don't realize is that he often spoke against the evils of his time. In other words, he was trying to make people realize, look, doing these evils is not good for you. For Naboth to get, or rather for Ahab, the king, to get the vineyard, well, he thinks it's good for him. And so often we focus on worldly things, but no, we need to focus on spiritual things. So with St. Anthony, he was very, very successful in getting people to come back to the faith, to the true faith, to get them to turn away from worldly things and to make them realize it's not just about this world, it's about eternity. And when we think about eternity, we will recognize that the value of a human being is far, far greater than some vineyard. It's far, far more important to respect a human being, even though he may be lower than us in stature or whatever, compared to a king, right? But what's a vineyard worth? Can you bring that vineyard with you to heaven? But if you do good to someone, the virtues you gain, the good deeds that you have gained, all of those things will benefit you in heaven, so that you will have a high degree of glory in heaven. These are the things that we should really be seeking and striving for. So St. Anthony, in his preaching, he reiterated these things, and he was known as a great miracle worker, but a great intercessor. And his power as a great intercessor was not just during his lifetime, but part of the reason he is so powerful is because he continues to intercede on behalf of people. And as you know, he's known as the patron of lost items. So people pray to St. Anthony to help find their lost items, right? And the reason that he's the patron saint of this is because when he converted heretics, those heretics were lost. So when he brought them back, it's kind of like he found them. So partially because of that. But it's true that when you lose something and you pray to St. Anthony, it's like, oh, well, that's where I put it. You remember, you find it. And sometimes we forget to invoke St. Anthony for these things. But also when we have family members who are away from the church, or friends, loved ones who are away from the church, it's good for us to invoke St. Anthony, to pray for their conversion, to try to bring them back, to find these ones who are lost, to convert them, to make them see the light. So he's an extremely great saint, and we should imitate him in his virtues, in his desire to want to spread the goodness of God to everyone around him. He did this by means of his miracles, but especially by means of his preaching. And he died fairly young. He died when he was only 36 years old. And part of the reason, or one of the contributing factors to his death, is that he wore himself out with his excessive preaching. And when he preached, he wouldn't just preach to a congregation in a church like this. And it's not as if he had to move to bigger and bigger churches. Well, he did, and he didn't just preach on street corners, but he had to go into fields where thousands of people could gather because people wanted to hear him. And of course, they didn't have microphones back in the day, so he would try to speak very loudly. And that requires a lot of energy, a lot of effort. And so he would preach for long periods of time, and also he was very penitential, understanding that he had to mortify the body, mortify the flesh, in order to grow spiritually. So he deprived himself of sleep, probably sufficient food, and he overexerted himself. So it's not surprising that he died fairly young. But why didn't he take better care of himself? Why did he exert himself so much? Because he had such great love for the people that he was preaching to. And he continues to love all of mankind from heaven, and that is why he is such a great intercessor.